Hello and welcome. I'm your hostess, Goblin Kwain, and tonight we will be reading first-hand paranormal encounters from the website Your Ghost Stories. It's going to be kind of a mixed bag. A lot of times I will focus on a theme that ties all the stories I read together, but the only thing that will be relating the tales I've chosen this time is simply that I found them all to be very interesting. In between stories, we will go into various topics such as folklore, history, science, and whatever else comes up. I'll also read comments that provide additional experiences and intriguing cultural insight. So, let's get started. The first story was submitted by Sami-san, and it took place in Mauritius. It's called Black Cloud Passing By. I'm French and have been living in Mauritius for more than 3 years now. I've never been raised in such beliefs as spirits, ghosts, or demons. Mauritius, though, is a place where a lot of people have witnessed paranormal activity of many sorts, but mostly apparitions of human-like or demonic forms that they interpret as being ghosts or demons. Some figures are so famous that they even get a name so that if you talk about it, anybody would know exactly what you're talking about. I've always been both very skeptical and curious about it. So, here's my story. On a Friday night at 2 a.m., all the dogs in the neighborhood, mine included, started barking intensely. Not howling, just barking, but strangely enough, all together. My dog is a Labrador, and he's usually calm and won't bark at anything. He started barking, but I thought he would stop like all the dogs pretty soon, so I went to sleep. But he kept barking very loudly as if he saw something, so I decided to get out of bed to check it out. I live in a big house near a pond, and there's a dirt path between the pond and the end of my garden, which is fully fenced. I found my dog in the closed patio, which has large glass windows through which one can see the pond and the dirt path. My dog was clearly barking at something which was near the path. At first, the outside lights were off, so I couldn't see anything. I turned the garden lights on. My dog went to the corner of the patio and was barking furiously, so I tried to look in the same direction as him, and suddenly I saw a form. At first, indescribable, moving on the dirt path, very smoothly and silently. The more I looked at it, the more it took a tangible form of a big black cloud, the size of a tall man, floating and moving like a slow, flying carpet. It lasted about 15 seconds until it passed by and went away, so I had time to really stare at it. I clearly saw 2 big white dots revolving inside the black cloud while it was moving up the dirt path. It seemed like the cloud was expanding as well. The dog saw it too. I now know my dog felt it before he even saw it, and I also believe I would not have seen it if my dog was not there then. I remember I touched my dog just before I saw the thing. Some Mauritian people told me that I saw through my dog's eyes because I touched him. Otherwise, I would not have seen it at all. While I was staring at the black cloud, I could feel it slow down very smoothly while passing in front of me, and the mass turned at me, but then sped up and went away. I've done some research. So far, I cannot relate to other black cloud stories, which are often linked to shadow people. The black cloud was thick. One could not see through it, and it never evaporated. It just left, like a slow and low, flying, living form. And the 2 big white revolving dots were really impressive. Has anyone seen anything similar? So, that's our first story to kick us off tonight, and it's very interesting. First, we have to address the country that it came from, Mauritius. This country is absolutely gorgeous and really quite a unique place. It's a very small island to the east of Madagascar. It definitely shines for its natural beauty. While it doesn't have much diversity in its wildlife, being so isolated, many of the species are endemic, meaning they only appear in one location. So a lot of the plants and animals on Mauritius aren't found anywhere else on Earth. The dodo bird was actually one of these endemic animals before it became extinct. Before humans introduced other species to the island, there were no terrestrial mammals on Mauritius, which allowed for the development of flightless birds, such as the dodo, and giant reptiles, such as tortoises. Speaking of humans, Mauritius has no indigenous people. It was an uninhabited island until the Dutch attempted colonization in the 17th century, and then the French went on to colonize it beginning in 1715. So, all the humans who reside on Mauritius are a result of colonization or slavery. Like I said, a really, really interesting place. Not somewhere that you really hear about too often. I know all of that is kind of a detraction from the topic of ghosts and spookiness, but I personally love the natural world just as much as the supernatural. I think there's much fascination to be had in both realms. So, I like to combine the natural world and the supernatural when we can. And I think we are very lucky to hear a ghost story from Mauritius. There are actually about 43 others on the Your Ghost Stories website, so maybe we'll read some more in the future. But focusing on this story for now, let me read a bit more information the author gave in the comments section. They say, "My mother-in-law, who's Mauritian, regularly sees paranormal entities and even communicates with them. She told me she knew what it was. To her, I saw a demon that they call Rakasa in Mauritius. Apparently, this demon loves to wander in dark places, and many people who work in cane fields saw it at night. I was told that if you ever try to interfere with the black cloud in motion, it attacks you, and then the best you can expect is to faint, or you get beaten to death." I couldn't find anything online about anything called Rakasa, or really even a translation for what that might mean, so if anyone knows what it means, let me know, or if you've heard of it. But I did find a few other bits about supernatural creatures in Mauritian folklore. I think it's always best to hear lore and legend from the locals, if possible. So let's read from this thread on the Mauritius subreddit. The original poster claims they are looking for cryptids and urban legends from Mauritius for a project, and they get a few responses. Particular Cookie says, "I remember in primary school, there was a rumor about students seeing a La Main Rouge in the toilet. Using the word rumor here since I've not personally seen it. Was this part of anyone's primary school experience?" Another person does reply that they had also heard this story in primary school. Unfortunately, there isn't any further elaboration on the actual stories, but La Main Rouge translates to the red hand, and stories of seeing a red hand in the school bathroom sounds pretty spooky. It does make me want to mention that I do have a video dedicated solely to stories and legends about disembodied hands. Red hands do come up, so the saga of disembodied hands continues. Another comment is similar. They just kind of rattle off different little legends they've heard. They say, "Is there anyone who knows anything of a decapitated horse's ghost lurking at midnight? Or that thing they say about all schools being built on old burial grounds? Or the woman with no feet on the old Grand Bay roundabout? I recalled one, forgot his name, but he's a very long dude with a long crooked neck and dark clothing that waits under mango trees in certain places past 6 p.m. My cousin saw it once, I think, but I was told about it by my neighbors, and you have to curse at him for him to leave you, else he follows you." Now, I don't know if those are all actually real legends or stories, or if they're being funny and kind of poking fun at, I don't know, Mauritius superstitious culture or something, but I'm interested in all of them. Finally, there's a couple of mentions of various werewolves. The loup-garou, which we've talked about in a video before, and another called Tony Minuit, which translates to naked at midnight. And there's much, much more to discover about Mauritius, be it folklore, ghost stories, flora, fauna, history, and more. It's a truly fascinating place, and I'm really glad we got to read this story from there. But for now, let's move on. Our next story was submitted by A Hill 1003. It took place in Indiana, and it's called One Strange Night. In 1985, I was 17 and dating a girl in Valparaiso, Indiana. Her dad and I became close, and we were both Bears fans at the best time you could be one. I was there late one night in December after a game, and my girlfriend, mother, and sisters went to bed. It was about 2 a.m. when we heard this banging outside. My girlfriend's dad said, "Want to see something?" We got bundled up and treaded outside in the knee-high snow. They lived outside town in a rural setting with a field across the road and just a few houses on their side. We went around the house, and I could see light in their neighbor's shed. Shadows were flashing through the light, and you could tell the bulb was swinging. The shed had windows in each door and opened barn style. As we got closer, I could see tools flying around the room and banging against the walls. I looked at him and asked, "What the hell is that?" He said, "I've seen this twice. Watch." When we got up to the doors, he reached up to grab the handle and looked at me just before he grasped it. He said, "Wait." Then he grabbed the handle. It was like a plug was pulled. Light went out and everything stopped. All you could hear was the wind. He said, "Show's over." We walked back silently. I went to the service a few months later and never saw him again. We never talked about it, not once. 20 years later, I ran into my ex-girlfriend and told her that story. She said he never told her that. She called him while I was sitting there, and he said, "Oh yeah, that was something all right." She just shrugged her shoulders and said, "Ain't that just like him?" That's an odd and fun, spooky little tale. They actually posted it on Halloween, too. How seasonally appropriate. Sounds like some sort of classic poltergeist, don't you think? The tools flying around the room and the light bulb swinging around. I have another one to read that has similar kind of poltergeist elements, but it's just a wee bit stranger. It was submitted by Jack McShane. It took place in Illinois, and it's called Green Lights Flashing. I didn't experience this firsthand, but my sister did, and she is not one to lie about these things, especially since she came home crying. She went over to her friend's house to check up on things. She was watching their house and feeding their animals while they were on summer vacation. She had just got done feeding their black and white tabby cat named Yin Yang. She went into her friend's room to dust some things off. That's when she heard the water running in the kitchen. She thought that maybe it was Yin Yang messing with the faucets, since he usually did. When she turned around, Yin Yang was sitting at her feet. That's when she started to get nervous. She cautiously went into the kitchen. She turned the corner, ready for a confrontation. When she did, there wasn't anything there. She ran over and turned the faucets off. She started to walk through the house, looking for an intruder. She didn't even get out of the kitchen before all the cupboards started opening and closing. She started to panic and threw herself on the ground, covering her head. She heard Yin Yang hissing, and when she looked up, there was a green light that filled the room. It flashed on and off as the cupboards opened and closed. Then, as quickly as it started, it ended. She didn't waste any time. She grabbed the cat and ran out of the house. She didn't stop running until she was safe back in our house. When her friend came back, my sister confronted her about what happened. She was shocked to find out that it had been happening a few times a month since they bought the house. that's why they had gone on vacation, to get a break from it all. They apologized for not telling her, and my sister never went back there again. 2 months later, my sister's friend and her family moved out. Very strange. I have done a lot of house sitting in my days, but I can't say I've ever experienced anything like that. More like people's basements flooding and things like that. I can't say I blame the author's sister or her friend's family for not wanting to return to that house. Sounds like a very jarring and unusual experience. The details in this story sound like something a lot of people would consider a poltergeist, but who knows what really caused the objects to move in the kitchen and the bright green light to fill the room. Green lights come up really often in paranormal reports. There are so many green lights that crop up all over the US in allegedly haunted places. I'm not sure why that is, but it's becoming a very specific interest of mine. I've started looking up and cataloging every single instance of what I can find in this crazy, almost 20-page Word document so far. So, let's just say it's something I'm looking into. Anyway, let's read one more story. This one was submitted by Uju13, and it took place in Nepal. It's called Death Parade. I was asking my mom to tell me Nepalese ghost stories because I like listening to ghost stories, and I wanted to get to know a bit more about our culture. One of the stories she told us about was this parade of floating fireballs. This would happen when someone dies, and when it's dark, a fire will appear on the street, a floating fireball that, from afar, looks as if someone's holding a torch. Then, more fireballs appear, like there's a small group, following the first, like a march, increasing in quantity until it looks like a festival march. It kind of reminded me of the Japanese ghost festival, or something like that, where the ghosts or demons come together and walk, holding lanterns. After hearing this story, my sister and I were like, okay, decent story, but our mom said, this story's true, I saw it. We didn't really believe her because it was such an odd story, but she told us how somebody in her village died, and a few days later, the phenomenon happened, and she and her siblings watched the parade from their second-floor balcony. She described it to be really beautiful, but scary. I really found it difficult to believe her, but she insisted she watched it with her brothers and sisters, so she wasn't the only one to see the strange parade. A moment later, my dad came over, and my mom asked him about the story and whether he'd seen one, because apparently every Nepali kid has. Then he very casually said, yeah, me and my friends always watched it when it happened. I was so confused. Dad continued and said how it was kind of scary, but he finished off by telling the whole family that there's a scientific reason for it. Apparently, scientists from Nepal discovered that a gas is created from the dead bodies. I hope I see this phenomenon when I go to Nepal. So, we have a lot to talk about with this one. Truly a fascinating glimpse into another culture and a strange, unexplained phenomenon, although there's a possible scientific explanation for it. The author mentions that they didn't quite grasp the scientific explanation that their father offered, so let's start there. I'm sure what their father was referring to was what is called marsh gas, also called swamp or bog gas. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with it already because it does come up a lot within the subject of paranormal phenomenon, but it's a mixture of chemical gases, primarily consisting of methane. It's often seen over swamps and bogs, as the name suggests. The reason that marsh gas may be offered as an explanation for the fireball parade in the story is because corpses in the putrefaction stage of decomposition release the same gases that make up swamp gas. And remember in the story that these fireballs would be seen after someone had died. So that is a possible explanation for the death parade in the story. The author's mother did say that the phenomenon would happen a few days after a person had died, and a body begins putrefying generally between 4 to 10 days after death. However, I've never seen marsh gas, so I don't really know how it behaves, how long it is visible for, how far it can travel, etc., etc. As I mentioned earlier, marsh gas comes up a lot when it comes to paranormal topics because it is used as an explanation to debunk a lot of different paranormal claims, such as ghost lights, will-o'-the-wisps, different UFO sightings, and now, apparently, death parades. Whatever the case may be, let's read some of the comments under this story because there is some very interesting feedback regarding this phenomenon. 2 Nepalese people comment who are familiar with this phenomenon and call it rake boot. I'm not exactly sure how to say that. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. There's a couple different spellings they give too. But Depeche Pasnat says, "My mom used to tell me the same story. Long time ago, when my mom was a kid, they used to sleep outside at night, and they used to see those chilling scenes, and I came to know the word rake boot by her." Hadi says, "In the Nepalese culture, it's called rake boot. People used to see them in graveyards, fields, hill slopes, etc. According to scientific reasons, it cannot travel distances, but I've known people who saw it come from the hills and disappear into the river." So unfortunately, I couldn't really find anything online looking up the phrase rake boot, and I tried the different spellings that people gave. So for now, we'll just have to go off of what these fine folks from your ghost stories have to say about it. Zaruje says, "I think it's the same as the Filipino Sant Elmo, a ball of fire that signifies spirits nearby." So my research to this was a little more fruitful. I found that Sant Elmo is a folklore belief and paranormal phenomenon found in Filipino culture. Much as Zaruje's comment says, they are said to be fireballs, or small orbs of light that appear in rural areas near fields, swamps, or areas of water. Generally, they are thought to be the spirits of those who died in or near the water, or during a heavy rain. More recently, they have been assigned as spirits of unbaptized children. Mankukulam.com says, "There are stories that if a man dies in the water, say in a river, sea, or while raining, his soul will stay in the area where he died. These lost souls may just be seeking peace and recognition, and it's said that lighting a candle or a torch in the area where Sant Elmo is seen can cause the entity to disappear and possibly move on. Other stories portray them as mischievous or even harmful spirits, vengeful due to their untimely death. Interestingly, they seem to bear resemblance to will-o'-the-wisps of English and Celtic folklore, and seeing a Sant Elmo fireball may inspire you to follow it, leading you astray until you are quite lost." Here's a quote for Dr. Maximo Ramos. "It is a ball of fire in fields and swamps. It bounces along and rolls away. It changes into a beast with fire in its mouth. Travelers and fishermen follow it at night. They walk and walk till they are tired out. Then they cannot find their way home. They walk into deep mud and thorny bushes. They get dizzy and become insane. They must reverse their clothes to send it away. Then they can find their way home." As I said, this has distinct similarities to will-o'-the-wisp legends in English and Celtic folklore. And in fairy lore, this is what would be described as being pixie-led. The same thing is said that you should turn your clothes out if this is happening, and it will break the enchantment and you can find your way back. So, the Filipino Sant Elmo resembles the will-o'-the-wisp and ghost light legends that are found across the world, and it is similar to the phenomenon described in the story we read. I find it interesting, though, that it doesn't really resemble the weather phenomenon it shares its name with. Sant Elmo is also called St. Elmo's Fire, and St. Elmo's Fire is more commonly known as a bizarre electrical discharge that has been observed shooting off of the masts of ships and the horns of animals and cell phone towers and other rod-shaped objects. Even though it's called St. Elmo's Fire, or sometimes Witch's Fire, which I think is a cooler name, it doesn't really look like fire. It looks more like lightning. It kind of reminds me of those plasma globes that you would put your hand on in the Discovery store when I was a kid. So anyway, why these Filipino ghostly fireballs are called Sant Elmo, I don't really know. Wikipedia claims that, quote, there are various indigenous names for Sant Elmo, which existed before the term Sant Elmo was coined. The term Sant Elmo originated from Spanish colonial rule in the Philippines. But there's no citation for that, and other articles I read about Sant Elmo dispute that claim. So, I'm not sure why it's called that. The only similarity I can find between the two is this. The plasma-based weather phenomenon is called St. Elmo's Fire because it was sometimes seen on the masts of ships at sea, and the patron saint of sailors is St. Elmo, so this was seen as a good omen by sailors. However, it was sometimes seen as a bad omen because St. Elmo's Fire occurs during stormy weather, and obviously, storms and seafaring don't really complement one another. The Filipino Sant Elmo also has a connection to water and stormy weather, so maybe that's where it gets its name. In regards to the story we just read, it's very cool that the phenomenon described in Nepalese culture seems to be similarly shared in another culture, and it's not the only one. In Japanese folklore, one example of this are hitodama, balls of fire that are said to be the non-corporeal spirit or soul of a deceased person. Unfortunately, Wikipedia was the only source I had for this that was available in English, and it says this. In Yakimata, hitodama are called tamase and are said to come out of the body 2 or 3 days after a human dies and go toward temples or people they have a deep relation with. They are said to make a great sound in storm shutters and gardens, but that this sound can only be heard by those who have a deep relation with the spirit. Finally, a comment on the story from CJ Worm says, I am from Uttarakhand, India. I've heard similar stories from my family elders. In fact, my elder sister has witnessed it. We call it Tuole in our language. We have a mountain right in front of our home in the village where young kids who die are buried, and a similar parade happens there. It's amazing to see this collective paranormal phenomenon that we share and experience with minute regional differences. I completely agree. And I may have just taken you down a bit of a rabbit hole after this last story we read, but it's because I find it so interesting to see very similar phenomenon appearing in different cultures, under different names, but very much the same. And you may find it best to go with the natural explanation, that it's some sort of atmospheric phenomenon, or it's a chemical reaction of gases that are released from bogs and decaying matter. And even if you do, I don't think it should take away from the cultural importance and intrigue that these stories hold. Let me read this excerpt from an article from the Aswang Project by Jordan Clark. If you are lucky enough to catch a glimpse of this ghostly phenomenon, take pause and imagine your ancestors' awe and wonder upon seeing such a sight. What stories would they create to explain such a harrowing event? If you still wish to dismiss the paranormal elements of otherworldly floating balls of fire, take time to appreciate that the possibly natural phenomenon has been recognized in folktales from the most advanced civilizations in history. Before you dismiss such things as ignorant superstitions, remember that these are the foundations of imagination and greatness. It is your link to the past. Well said, and that's all for tonight. We covered a lot, from the odd poltergeist activity to the more strange tales of dark floating demons and funerary fire parades. I hope you enjoyed the stories and science. Like I said earlier, to me, there's wonder to be found both in the supernatural and natural realms. And these paranormal experiences leave us examining both the world we inhabit and possibly the others that exist just out of reach until we seem to perceive them just for a moment. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, good night.